Baruch Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Menachos daf tzadi Daled, but we're going to start on the bottom of tzadi Gimel on the base at the Mishnah. It says the Mishnah Chomer b'smicha mi b'tenufa, that smicha, which is the laying the hands of on the animal before the slaughter and reciting a confessional prayer or words of praise to Hashem, and that tenufa is the waving of the parts of the animal, or sometimes, like we saw with the kibtzei atzeres, the waving the animal while it's alive. So the smicha has certain stringencies over tenufa, or tenufa mi b'smicha, and the waving has certain stringencies over the smicha. She'echad meinef l'koach haverim, because one person, let's say many people together, multiple people combine to do a carbon. So then one person does the tenufa for everyone, because its concept is it's a obligation on the sacrifice, not on the person. So therefore, one can do it for everyone. When it comes to smicha, each individual who's participating has to do a smicha. You can't have one person lean their hands for everyone. Here we'd say it's an obligation on the person, not on the korban. Chomer b'tenufa, what's the stringency of tenufa? Tenufa nuhagas b'korbanos yachid, u'b'korbanos tzipor. Tenufa applies to individual and communal offerings, b'chayim u'b'shlutin, while they're alive and even after they're dead, u'b'davar sheyesh bo ruach chayim, and only applies to something. It applies to something that's alive, u'b'davar she'ein bo ruach chayim, even something not alive, like the omer offering, which is not alive but it still gets weighed. Smicha applies to individual offerings, generally speaking, except for the two communal offerings. It only applies to a living animal. And it doesn't apply after it's slaughtered. So Taner Rabban in the Gemara side, it's a price at Karbano. It says in the pasuk with respect to smicha, Rabos kol bali carbon with smicha. This includes everyone who's involved in the carbon has to do smicha. Sheyachol, you might have thought, Olodinhu. You might have thought to make a kavachomer, Amat tenufa shenisrabta b'shchutin nismata b'chubarin. Just like tenufa, just like with respect to tenufa, where we say that it can apply after the slaughter, nismata b'chubarin, it does not apply if there's a large group, only one person does it. Smicha shalom nisrabta b'shchutin, smicha, which it doesn't apply after the slaughter, eino din shetismat b'chubarin. For sure, you might have thought it doesn't apply to everyone in the group. Talmud or Karbano, so it says in the pasuk, Karbano, Rabos kol bali karban l'smicha. Anybody who's participating in the carbon has to do smicha. More question. So the Brisa says v'tisraba tenufa b'chubarin mikav v'chomer, and the Brisa can. Oh, the Gemara is asking now that tisraba tenufa b'chubarin mikav v'chomer. We should increase we should say that everyone should do the tenufa from a kavachomer, mas smicha shel nisrabta b'shchutin, just like smicha, which doesn't take place after slaughter, nisrabta b'chubarin, but everyone who participates, who's a partner in it, does the smicha. Tenufa shel nisrabta b'shchutin, tenufa, which there's an increase of as it relates to the shchuta, eino din shel nisrabta b'chubarin. For sure, it should be the case that they should do, everyone who's participating in the partner in the carbon should have to do the tenufa. So the Gemara says the reason why we don't say that is mishum delasha, because it's an impossibility. How would we have it that everyone participates in the tenufa? Minfu kula ba'adiyadada. You want everybody to wave it at the same time? Kavya chatzitza, that would make an interposition, a chatzitza, and everybody needs to be holding the animal themselves, and they can't have multiple people holding it, and so that makes a chatzitza. So let's say you have one person wave it, then another one comes and waves it, successively. That can't work because tenufa marachmana v'lo tenufa. So Torah says you should do a waving and not multiple wavings. So that is not going to work either. Gemara said, going back a little, the Gemara asks, "Usmicha b'shchutin leisa." Are you saying that there's never smicha after an animal is slaughtered? V'atanan. Then we learn in the Mishnah Mesechas Tamid, Bizman Kohen Gadol wrote so there, when the Kohen Gadol had the right to bring a carbon whenever he wanted. So if the Kohen Gadol wanted to bring a carbon, he would go up the ram, The scan will be the deputy will be on his right side. He came to halfway up the ramp. The scan held him on the right. When he brought him up, there would be an assembly line of Kohanim there to partake in the offering. And so one of them who was there were 12 people who the Mishnah in Talmud says who engaged in Mesechus, who engaged in the Carbon Talmud. And so therefore, the first one of the people who was there, what would he do? He would Hoshid Arisho and Harosha Regel. He would hand to the Kohen Gadol the head and the leg. So Mechalayim, the Kohen Gadol would put his hands, do the smicha on the head and the leg of the animal, Mezorkan, and then he would throw them onto the altar, onto the fire. Hoshid Sheni Arisho. And then the second of the 12 people that were there would hand over to the first person, Shtei Yadayim. He would give him over the two hands. No snow Kohen Gadol. And the two forearms, and then the first one will give it to the Kohen Gadol. So he would lean on them, Mezorkan, and throw them on the fire. Nishmat Hasheni. Let's say once the second person finished, V'hoachlo, and then the Kacha Yumashitilo Sharko Ivarim, and then all the others would come up and they would hand it to the first person who would hand it to the Kohen Gadol, who would throw it onto the altar. But first, the Kohen Gadol was doing smicha. And if the Kohen Gadol wanted it, he would do the smicha, and others would do the throwing. The Kohen Gadol could be elderly, and it's not an easy thing to start throwing limbs of a bull onto the. It's a tamid, is a sheep, so fine. So he's throwing the limbs of the sheep onto the altar. Not so necessarily easy. So, but anyway, we see from here, even after the animal is slaughtered, the Kohen Gadol still did smicha on him. So we see even after an animal is slaughtered, you can have smicha. Abai says, no, there it's a special case. That's the Kohen Gadol. Asa mishum kvodo, the Kohen Gadol. That was only because of the special honor that was owed to the Kohen Gadol, and so therefore he did the smicha. The Rashi explains, Shetei Toros Aktaraso Me'ula Misharak Toros Dishar Kohanim. In order to just be a differentiator between the Kohen Gadol and the other Kohanim, they allowed him to have this extra inyan, but otherwise it's not really part of the mitzvah of smicha. It's a special thing just for the Kohen Gadol. Hadranolach Shtei Midos, and we will return to you Shtei Midos. We'll return to you at 8 a.m. in Meretz Hashem when we return to this stuff. Now we're going to do the 11th chapter, which is called Shtei Alechem. So Shtei Alechem, there are two loaves of bread that are bought on Shavuos, and loshas achas ve'achas. They are kneaded one at a time. V'nefos achas ve'achas. Then when they're baked in the oven, they're baked one at a time. But the lechem apanim, these are the 12 loaves which are baked on Friday, put into the oven on Friday, and then kept on the shulchan from Shabbos to Shabbos and even the next Shabbos. These are called the lechem apanim. Niloshas achas achas. They're kneaded one at a time. V'nefos shtayim shtayim, and they're baked two at a time. One of the minhagim is because the lechem apanim were baked on Friday, therefore it's a minhag that people should bake their chalas on Friday, all things being equal, because this way it's resembling the lechem apanim. Ubitfus hayosos, and the lechem apanim were made in a mold, and kishu rodan, when he would take them out of the oven, no atfus, and he would then put them into another mold, kadesh lo yiskalku, so that they wouldn't get, break up. Gemara asked the question, Minani Mili, how do we know this idea that two loaves are kneaded one at a time, and the lechem apanim are also kneaded one at a time, but two loaves are baked one at a time, and the lechem apanim is baked even two at a time? What's the source for this idea? Because it says Shnei Esronim about the lechem apanim. It says that you shall bake 12 chalos. Shnei esronim yeh chalachas. That each chala of the 12 loaves has to be 2 esronim. That teaches us that each one is needed one at a time. So how do we know that the two loaves of bread on Shavuos is also needed one at a time? So it means it should be like the other one should be, which is two needed one at a time. How do we know that the lechem apanim is baked two at a time? You shall place them, and so that implies that when you bake them in a multiple. So, as Rashi says, the first time you place them should be an expression of osam, which is in plural. So then the Gemara says, Yachol ab shtei lechem. Okay, I might think also two loaves of bread baked two at a time. Tamomar osam. So that it says the lechem apanim and not the shtei lechem. The Gemara says, but wait, I osam, I fikte. You just used the word osam to teach us that the lechem apanim is baked two at a time, and now you can't use it twice to exclude now the shtei lechem being baked two at a time. And the Gemara says, Imkein lemekrav visamtem my visamta osam. It says it as samta osam instead of just samtem. Shras minat tarti. So we learn from here both halachos. Tana Rabbanan v'samta osam b'tfus. You're supposed to place lechem apanim in a mold, like a cookie cutter. Shlosha defus in him, and the Rambam says that this defus was made out. All three were made out of gold. Rashi's position is that the first and the last were made out of gold, but not the middle one. So Shlosha defus in him. There were three molds. Those no defus. First mold, you put it into the mold, vadayin hibatzek, while it's still in the dough. And the mold was necessary to make it into the form that it is, that we'll see it's going to eventually be in. Okay. So the first you put in, and then it's in a dough form. Also in the oven, it was also in the form of a mold when you baked it, and that's how you would bake the bread. And when you took it out of the oven, nose number tfus again was placed into a tfus, so it wouldn't get ruined. So the Gemara asks a question: why not put it back in the first tfus? The Gemara says, given the apila, no. Once you baked it, it expanded, and so you could no longer go back into the first tfus. Now, 1 second. Okay. So how was the lechem apanim made? How were the lechem apanim made? So Rabbi Chanina Amar Kamin Teva Prutza. Rabbi Chanina says that it was made like basically an open box. And Rashi has a diagram here that you have to imagine a box without the top of it, and it's flat on the bottom, and there are two sides coming up on either side on right angles. So Rashi says you remove the cover, and its two walls are opposite each other. So the bread had two walls, and it had a wide base. Kamin Teva Prutza. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kamin Svina Rokedes. Rabbi Yochanan says it's like a Svina Rokedes, like a small ship that either Rokedes means like moving swiftly or movement, some sort of movement. And so the basic point, Rashi says, it doesn't have like a bottom. It's wide on the top. And on the bottom, it reaches like a point. And Rashi has a diagram. And its two sides go up keep going up in opposite directions, and they don't touch the water. This is why it's called rokedes, because it's mirakedes. It's like dancing or moving quickly, and that's what Rashi says it means. Okay, so basically, Rabbi Chanina says it's a teva prutz, it's a box that's open. Rabbi Yochanan says it's like a fast-moving ship. Now, Bishlam Amanda Amar Kamin Teva Prutz. It makes sense according to one who says it's like an open box, Hainu Dave Yasve Bezikin, we're going to see that according to, there's a debate in the Mishnah later on, how did the Bezikin, which are the frankincense, the spoons, according to one opinion, they have to be on the bread itself. So if the bread is flat, I understand how it could be on the bread. So it makes sense according to Rebbe Chanina. Elaman Namar Kamin Sfina Roketas, one that says it's like a pointy ship. Where would the Bezikin be? So it has no base. So where would it be? So the Gemara says, Makam Avid Lahu. So they must have made a place for it in one of the walls. They would fix like of the bread. They would make a space for the Bezikin to go. Bishlam Amad Amar Kamin Teva Prutza makes sense according to Rabbi Kamin said it's an open box. Hainu Davayasve Kanim. That's we're going to say that they would put rods across the top of the lechem so that the breads wouldn't mix with each other and stick together, become moldy. So that makes sense. If it's flat, that's where it would go. But but according to the one who says it's like a moving ship, how would the rods be able to be resting on? So we'll again read this Rashi. Well, we have to amend the text a little bit of the Rashi. Hold on one second. Rashi says the Katani must nisim because we're going to learn later on Daf Tzadi Vav Tavches Kinim Hayisham. There were 28 rods. Shayinosing Gimel Kinim Shel Zahav Alech. And they put 3 golden rods on the first loaf. Alechem Harishon Rosho Echad Shalkana Al Dofan Zev Rosho Achal Dofan Zev Al Kana Mahim Moshe V'Achamach. They put the rods and piled the bread on top of it until there were 6 rods. 6 loaves one on top of the other. So therefore, basically, and they would distinguish. So according to one that says it's a Svina Rokedes, where would the Kinim rest? So it's not Kinim, it's Kanim. So Amanda Amr Svina Rokedes, Yasri Kanim. Rishon Roshan Chadim, their top was pointy, and you can't put the rods there. You'd only be able to fit 1 rod in the middle. Otherwise, it's not going to work because it's on a slant. So what are you going to do? So the Gemara answers, Morsha Avid Lahu. So the Gemara says, Morsha Avid Lahu, that they basically attached some bread in the middle with a little dough, and that's how they were able to put the rods. So they basically built out the bread a little bit so that it could, so the rods would have a place. They had a little extra dough there to receive the bread, like a ridge. The Gemara says, "Bishlam man amar kamin teva prutza." Makes sense according to the one who says it's teva prutza. I know there's something with sniffing lolachem. There were boards that were used to support the bread. Let's see what Rashi says here. To Katani masnis, and again, we're going to God willing get to this in 2 days. It says in the Mishnah, Arba snifin hayisham. There were four boards. Mefutzalim berosheim. Shnaim l'seder zeh, shnaim l'seder zeh. There were 4 boards, 2 on either side. Each tray had 2 boards. That they were used to support the bread, 2 for one tray and 2 for the other tray, and they were like these pillars, like the width of the bread, 5 tefachim, and their height was like the height of the trays, and they would stand on either side of the bread. And the walls of the basically it was used to support. Like these little space for the trays, like indentations for the trays to be put in. But anyway, Go back to the text of the Gemara. So it makes sense. Who says like a teva prutza? I know the samchalei snif and lechem. You could easily imagine how it fit in and it supported the molds. But El Amanda Amar Kamin Sfina Rokedes, according to the bread, according to one who says it's Sfina Rokedes, I know the Bain and Snifin. Excuse me. According to Hechi Samchalei Snifin Lechem. How are the boards able to support the bread? It wasn't, it's not flush against it. So the Gemara answers, the agal. So they rounded at the bottom so it was able to encompass it and support it. They rounded the sniffing. So then the Gemara says, Bishal man amar kamin svina rokedes. This makes sense according to one who says it's like a diagonal ship. I know the sniffing. That's why we need support. Alman amar kamin teva prutza. But according to one who says that it was like an open box, then sniffing lamui. Then why do you need even these boards? So basically, why do you need the boards if they're really strong on their own? And Mar explains, Agav yukra de lechem toach, because the bread would be the top breads would be so heavy, and then we're worried the bottom breads would break, and so the boards would support them. It makes sense according to one who says it's like this ship. Nifin al gabe shulchan munachim. So then, according to that approach, you put the boards on the table, meaning to say that the bottom of the bread was pointy, and that was the only part that was on the table, and so therefore there was a space to put the boards. Elamanda Amar, but according to the one who says that it was Kamin Teva Prutza Snifan Echim, if it was like this open box, it would take up the space. Then how are they going to support where would the boards go? There's no room for them on the table. So the Gemara says they put on the ground. The Gemara says, and yes, Rabbi Chanina says that they were on the ground. According to the one who says like a svina rokedes, the snifin were on the table. According to the one who says it's like a teva prutza, snifin al gabe karkamil. The snifin were on the ground. Command also hadam. Raikum does it go the following position? Rabbi Huda said, "Alechem mamin es snifin." The bread supports the snifin. V'snifin mamin es alechem, and the snifin support the bread. Command amar kamin svina rokedes. Like the one who says, like Rabbi Yochanan, who says like a svina rokedes, because they're less stable, and so therefore you needed the snifin. Meisvei kamin. So the Gemara challenges Rabbi Yochanan, who says it's like a svina rokedes. Basically, we have the following position. We have a brisa that says, "Kamin kaveras hayala betanur." That there was a mold that was shaped like a beehive in the oven. Vidome kamin tabla murubas, and this mold was like a board of wood that was square. Meaning to see that the mold was square, like a open box. Normally, I mean, it's a little bit confusing because normally Kaveris is a circular beehive, but here it doesn't mean that. It means like there was a box where you could breathe like a beehive. But anyway, the more answers, Ema upia doba kamin tabel mubas, means to say only the top of it was similar to like a square box, so that you could put the bread in, but underneath it was pointy. So then the Gemara says, Tana, Commander Amar, there's a bright that says, like the one that says, like Rabbi Yochanan, Svina Rakedes, Tanya Arba, Snifin Shal Zahav, Hayisham, Mufutsalam Mirashain. So there were 4 snifin of gold there, and on their tops, there were like little indentations so that you could put the board, ukamin duokranayu, and there were like these little indentations. Um, Somchem es alechem shudomak min svina rokedes. And so basically, the Brisa says explicitly that it's like a svina rokedes, and that's the support for Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, we'll stop here, Baruch Hashem, and pick it up again at 8 o'clock.